But this song was written back in 2004. We're doing our message series now through October on messages from songs. And we've looked at, I don't know what we looked at last week, was I can only imagine, right? And even if was the week before that. So here we are with Live Like You Were Dying. This song was written back in 2004 by Tim McGraw and his friend Tim Nichols. And it actually was a song written out of the discussion they had after discovering a friend of theirs was diagnosed with cancer, terminal cancer. And so this kind of triggered their discussion of what would you do, what would you do, what would you do, and that's how the song came to be. It had to be a country song because it had about riding a bull in it. Which is kind of surprising because you think, no, I'd lift my truck or something like that, you know, go get me a new dog or something like that. Anyway. A great movie. If you've not seen this movie, you got to be careful a little bit with the language in it. It's written back in, came out back. Actually, this is a good movie. It stars Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman. Just kind of give you the storyline real quick. These are two men who would have never met in life. But through cancer, they meet. They're placed in the same hospital room together, and both of them with terminal cancer, and there's different types of cancer, and unlikely friendship takes place. Jack Nicholson, his character is that of a wealthy businessman, friendless but wealthy, and just a hard charger and been about money all of his life. Morgan Freeman is a guy whose life has kind of got away from him. He is a very intellectual man with a desire and love for history, but wanted to go to college and all those things. Got lost when his wife became pregnant soon as they got married, and so his life has been working to provide for his family. And so he has made up what is called the bucket list. There's a sheet of things that he has written down that he would like to do in his life. Well, one day in the movie, it's discovered by Jack Nicholson. And both of them reach a point in their thing of remission, a temporary remission. They both didn't change the diagnosis that they were going to die from cancer, but a remission where they felt good enough that they could go and do these bucket lists because Jack Nicholson, his role, had the money to pay for these things. And so they set out and they did these things. And some of the things on their bucket list was skydiving, but they wanted to go to the Taj Mahal. They visited the Great Wall in China. They went and raced Shelby Mustangs, and that sounds pretty cool, right? They went and climbed the pyramids in Egypt, and they went up on Mount Everest. And so they had a pretty good list of things that they did on their bucket list. And so it makes us wonder about our own lives and how we're going to live. Now, there's one problem with the title to this song, Live Like You Were Dying. Because that would imply that you might not be dying. Right?
Really?
So how many of you have got the news? You is dying, right? So we are dying. We're all in the process of dying. That diagnosis was given to us the very day we were born. The Ecclesiastes reminds us there's a time to be born and there's what? A time to die. And you just don't know how many days are in between those two events. And so we need to live our lives like we are indeed dying. But for us as believers, we are living to live forever. So for us, yeah, we're going to die, but we die in order to live forever in heaven. Well, let me call your attention to a couple scripture passages. Ephesians chapter 5, we looked at a few weeks ago in our series on Ephesians. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. Seize every opportunity and redeem the time, because the days are evil, meaning the days are short, the days are corrupted, the days are distracting, the days are all of those things. And if you will turn to James chapter 4, I want to share with you verses 13 through 15 before we move on today. A passage that you're familiar with, at least the concept of it. It says, now listen to you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city. We'll spend some time there, carry on business, make some money. Why? You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then you vanish. If it's King James, I think it says your life is what? But a vapor here and then it's gone. Instead, you ought to be saying, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or do that. And so it gives us a reminder that life is short. And this is something interesting. If you're here this morning and you're young, you know, you got all this life ahead of you that you think, and you might be in a place, oh, I can't believe how long it's taken to do this, doing that. But those of us here with a little age on us says, man, where has the time gone? Life has flown on. And so it is indeed a truth that life is like a vapor, and it's here for a while, and then it's gone. And we need to be focused upon God's will for our lives. I want to share with you today two stories. I want to share with you a story from the Old Testament, and I want to share with you a story from the New Testament. The first story is the story of King Hezekiah. It's told in 2 Kings chapter 18 through 20. Obviously, we're not going to read chapters 18 through 20. I am going to highlight some of the verses in that. And so when you look at the kings, one of the neat things of the kings is it tells you, as you read the book, when a person becomes a king, it usually gives you a descriptive. It tells you who he is, of course. It tells you how old he is normally. And then it will always have a descriptive of a summary, which will always say something like this. He was a man who did evil in the eyes of God, or he did right in the eyes of God. And so you start with Hezekiah's story. He's 25 years old when he becomes the king. How many of you think that'd be pretty cool to be king when you're 25 years old? I think it'd be cool to be king now at 59 years old. But anyway, 25 years old when he became the king. And the scripture says he did what was right in the eyes of his Lord. His father and his grandfather did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They allowed the introduction of false idols into Israel. They allowed the construction of false altars, sacred stones, Asherah poles to be put even in the temple. And we're told here that when Hezekiah became the king, he set forth to destroy all of those things. In fact, of interest, if you'll go back 150 years before Hezekiah to Moses, and you remember where God sent poisonous snakes into the camp, that God also, for deliverance from the bite of that, gave that golden snake, bronze snake, that we see it now in the story of Hezekiah. 150 years later, it had become a false idol to be worshipped. And so it becomes broken into pieces as well. In chapter 18, verse 5, it says this about Hezekiah. He trusted God, and listen to this, and there were no other kings of Judah like him before or after him. That's a pretty amazing thing, isn't it? No other king like him before or after. He trusted God. Then your story moves to chapter 20. In verse 1, he's 39 years old, so he's been king now for 14 years, and he becomes deathly ill. The prophet Isaiah comes to him and tells him, you're going to die. You need to get your house in order. Listen to me. When you go to your doctor and your doctor tells you you're going to die, you can go out and get a second opinion, right? You can sit there and say, well, maybe they missed this. Maybe they get that. When the prophet of God comes and tells you you're going to die, what's going to happen? You're going to die. And so there's no second opinion to get here. You get your house in order. And Hezekiah has the reaction that most of us would have. He began to cry, began to weep. And he began to pray for healing, and he told God, reminded God of everything he had done for him. He reminded God how he destroyed all these false idols and took them out of the temple and all this other stuff. And God heals him. But then the story gets a little weird. God not only heals him, God sends Isaiah, the prophet, back to him and says, God has not only healed you, he's adding 15 years to your life. 15 years to your life. Now, if I interpret this right, that would mean for 15 years nothing can happen to this guy. He's kind of like Superman. You can't shoot him and kill him, right? He can't get killed in a donkey wreck. You can't assassinate him. I mean, for 15 years, because God has decreed you're going to live for another 15 years. So you're living under this thing, man, I am invincible. Nothing can happen to me until that 15-year mark. And then I'm going to die. Don't know how, but I know I'm going to die. And for most of the 15 years, Hezekiah did pretty well until he gets to the very end and he blows it. Remember his story. He was a man who did what was right in the eyes of God. He was a man who trusted God. He did all these acts on behalf of God, but now he gets to the end and he blows it. He has an envoy from the kingdom of Babylon that comes. Now, if you know your church history, you know Old Testament history, then you would know that Babylons and Israelites had their tangles before. But here's an envoy from Babylon that's come, and now we see a man who has become so arrogant, who has become so careless, that he takes this potential enemy and shows him the things of the kingdom. Isaiah comes to him after the envoy leaves, and he says, what did you show them? And here Hezekiah says, I showed them everything. In fact, there is nothing that I did not show them. And he had even taken them into the temple treasury. So he didn't only show them what they had, he showed them where they kept it. And to paraphrase it, Isaiah says, you know, you're just an idiot. But because of what you've done, I want you to understand, God is going to allow the Babylonians to conquer Israel. You've opened up the door for that, and the Babylonians are going to come in and they're going to take everything that you showed them. They're going to take everything that you've shown them. And they're going to take your people, including your own flesh and your blood, to be captives and slaves back in Babylon. And you know what Hezekiah had to say? Now remember, when he found out he was dying, he wept. He prayed. When he finds out this punishment, he doesn't weep. He doesn't pray. He doesn't ask God to change it one iota. You know what he asked? If you'll take and look over it in chapter 20, verse 19, this is what he says. Will there be security in my lifetime? In other words, my 15 years is about up. So what you're saying means all this is going to happen after I'm dead, right? Whew! Can you believe that? A king would find comfort in the fact that he's not going to be taken captive by the Babylonians, but his flesh and blood will. The people of his nation will. He's not going to lose all of his wealth, but the people behind him are. And sure enough, as you know the story, the Babylonians do come and conquer, and for 70 years they become slaves and servants to the Babylonian people. How can a man move from trusting God and being no other king like him from there to here? Because at some point in your life you get careless. You get arrogant. And look at apathy. Talk about being apathetic as well as pathetic. He didn't care what happened to those after he was gone. Didn't care. It was only about himself. Well, let me take you to the New Testament, to Luke chapter 12. We know it as the parable of the rich fool. When you see the word fool in the scriptures, you need to take extra look at it. Because it's a statement of damnation so strong that, remember, Jesus tells us to do what? Call no man a fool. But yet Jesus called this man a fool because what he did was so foolish. And it's a parable, it's a story. And here's the simple story. It's a farmer. But on this particular harvest, an extraordinary harvest takes place. Now, I'm not talking about an extra couple truckloads of harvest. We're talking about a supernatural type of harvest that when this man began to see all that was being brought in from his harvest, it was enough to last for the next 5-6 years. In fact, he says, I'm going to build bigger barns to store it all. And here's my plan. I'm going to build these bigger barns, and I'm going to store all of this, and then I can kick back. You can look this up there in Luke chapter 12, verse 16 through 24. And he says, I'm going to kick back, and I'm going to take life easy. And for the next 4 or 5 years, as long as all this crop lasts, I'm not going to work another day. I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. See, it's amazing when you see people who win the lottery, for example. What's the very first thing you hear them say? I quit. I'm going to kick back, relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Listen, Christian people, how many of you realize God didn't make you to kick back and relax? And even in the American society, we need to be reminded of this concept of retirement, but that's not a Christian concept. The only people in the entire Bible that was allowed to retire was the Levite priests at the age of 50 who served in the temple, meaning that they were the ones that did all the animal sacrificing. At the age of 50, they retired from that service and continued their support. No other people retired in the Bible. This is an Americana Western world concept, and if you can retire from your job and stuff, more power to you. But how many of you understand as a Christian you don't get to retire from life? You're still called to use your gifts and your talents to serve the Lord. You're still called into Christian service, and that continues to the day that you die. So here's a man who says, no, man, I'm just going to kick back, take life easy, enjoy it, and just do what I want to do, when I want, how I want. And that seems to be the dream for a lot of people. But it's really, when you look at it, Jesus says, verse 20, you're a fool. You're a fool. But this is the reason. You're making all these great plans, where the next few years you're not going to have to do any work and just kick back and relax and do everything you want to do. But this is why you're a fool, because this very night your life's going to end. Let me translate it for you. This night you're going to die. This very night, you're not going to wake up and see morning. You're going to die during the night. And then who's going to get all these crops that you're so boastful about? You're missing life. You're missing the whole purpose of life, is what Jesus is saying. This is why you've been foolish. You're missing what it's all about. When you look at some of the problems that this man has in his story, obviously selfishness, because one of the things that should happen here is if he had all of this great resources, had all this great abundance, how many of you would say, hey, couldn't he give some of it away? How many people around him who were starving? How many people around him did not have a good harvest? Poverty's always been around. But this was not a concept. It was not, I'm going to go and share this with other people. No. I'm going to build the barns where I can have this for the future. The selfishness. Folks, in America, selfishness prevails. We are all about ourselves. I've just finished reading an interesting book. Not a great book. I even forget the name of the book, but it's a satire. And it's about a Christian. And the Christian being the perfect Christian and finding the perfect church. But the whole thing centers around this one thing. Don't forget, it's all about you. It's all about you. That's the whole satire of the story. But that's really, in reality, the way a lot of us live, particularly in America. It's all about us. Let's take the hurricane, for example. None of us are losing sleep that the Bahamas are tore up. Right? And we're not even losing sleep if it's somebody at the coast whose house has been destroyed. But how many of us would have a completely different reaction if it was our home? Right? Because this is the world in which we live. So selfishness is prevailing, but purposelessness. Living your life without any purpose whatsoever, that you're just going to kick back and relax and just have no purpose, and therefore you become useless. Your life is useless. Your life is useless. Is there anybody in this room that would like that as a descriptive of your life? My life has been useless. My life has served no purpose. So what about our own lives? I bet some of us in this room have a bucket list. And it would be interesting to have a conversation just to see what would be on your bucket list. I've reached a point in life I don't have a bucket list. There used to be things that would have made my bucket list, but those things have just kind of faded away over time. They just don't seem that significant. Is it wrong to have a bucket list? No, man, if you want to go ride a bull named Jin Hu Fu, whatever his name was. Sound like a pretty bad bull to me. But you go ride that bull if that's what's, floating your boat. In fact, come on down to Solar City this afternoon. I'll help you ride a bull. We'll find you a bull to ride. We can make your dreams come true. Let me remind us of something today. We're here and we call ourselves followers of Jesus Christ. Let me ask you a question. How many of you say a follower of Jesus Christ should have some different life desires than the non-followers? We should have a whole different set of rules, a whole different set of motivations now following Christ that was different from what we used to have. And I don't want to be like a Hezekiah who blows it. I've lived my life trying to live well, and now the focus of my life needs to be finished. For however many years are left, Should I finish? We need to live intentional lives. That's why Paul said to the Ephesians, seize the day, seize the opportunities, redeem the time, because time is limited and you can't get time back. So it's all limited. The days are short, the days are evil. Redeem the time. Understand your life is but a vapor, and all these things that you're planning for tomorrow may never come. So for Christians, things should be a little bit different. I hope that on your bucket list as a Christian are things like, hey, before I die, I want to lead another person to Christ. Because you know over 90% of Christians have never done that. Over 90% of Christians have never led another person to Christ. How many of you like to go to heaven knowing there's somebody coming behind you? Or maybe even somebody's going ahead of you that you actually told them about Jesus. That would be a pretty cool thing to have on your bucket list. How about taking your life and investing it in someone younger than you? Mentoring, discipling a new believer, for example. You know, a person who's new to Christ. You've been a follower of Christ for how long? You sat in Sunday school classes for how many years? And that you would just come beside this person and say, hey, I just want to encourage you. I want to be a mentor to you. I just want to pray with you. I want to pray for you. I just want to stand with you. Listen, to come beside a young couple, married couple. And you say, hey, I want to encourage you. I'm just going to come beside you and pray for you. I want you to know I'm praying for you every day. And I just want to come beside and help encourage you because, look, I was married for 40 years, 50 years, and I know the ups and the downs. The same with parenting and all those different things that we could come beside another person and invest our life into them. Go on a mission trip. You know, a lot of you never even been on a mission trip. A lot of you never even come to one of our outreach events, which are pretty mission trip minded. But as long as you're still moving, there's still something you can do, right? Because all of us may get to a point where we can't do any of these things. And listen, how about reconciling some broken relationships? We're Christians. The Bible tells us to forgive. The Bible tells us to reconcile, to make restitution. And if you have broken relationships, we need to do this. See, this is the truth for all of us, including myself. I try to live a very intentional life. I live a pretty full, busy life. But even living a pretty full, busy life don't always mean you're being busy about the right things, right? So to always try to be intentional in what you're doing and doing those things. But probably for every one of us in this room, if we went to the doctor tomorrow and the doctor says, okay, you got 6 months left to live, how many of you probably start making some changes in the next 6 months? The things that meant so much to you today ain't going to mean squat to you tomorrow. Not when you find out you got 6 months left to live. Things that you're so busy doing and all these other things all of a sudden doesn't seem that important. I think we would want to make sure that our relationships are right. I think that we would want to try to find that way to serve God and do for God. You know, one of the saints in First Wesleyan Solar City, and Michael Gay here today, was a lady we call Miss Bubby. Her name was Bertha Phillips. And when we went to Solar City, Miss Bubby lived next door. And she was 80-something years old then. And not a lot she could have done. She had done all the things you do in the church world. She had taught, Sunday school and children's church. And she had done all those things through the years. Now she reached this age, and she would tell me, really, about the only thing I do is pray. Man, she prayed for her pastor. This lady called me every week until she died, at least once a week. She finally moved into an apartment across town, but never did a week go, and usually at least twice a week. And I'd answer the phone call, and it would always be, how's my pastor today? And some days the pastor wasn't too good. See, pastors have to work with Christian people. And some days that's not good. 2-minute phone call with someone like that, and all of a sudden you're 6 feet taller. You know? Always something we can do for the Lord. Doesn't matter our age. Doesn't matter our physical health. That's why we need to find a way to serve Him, to live a life just like we are indeed dying. Let me close this morning with a scripture verse from Paul and then a poem that I want to share with you. Paul had been in prison now for several years. He knew his execution was coming. As he writes this in 2 Timothy chapter 4, the writing now is on the wall. He knows this is going to be his final letter, that he's getting ready to be executed. So he writes these words, and you've heard it in many funerals. I am now ready to be poured out like a drink offering. The time for my departure from this world is near. But you know this part. I have fought the good fight. I have finished my race and have kept my faith. Now there is in store for me the reward of heaven. Not just for me, but to everyone who believes in Him. If this is it, the next hour, the next day, are you ready? Can you declare that you have fought your fight, you ran your race, you kept your faith, and you are ready to be poured out like a drink? Sometime back in the 90s, we were at a conference in Ohio when the speaker used this little poem. The author of this little poem was unknown. But this little poem God used to grab the heart and the mind of a pastor who was in his 30s at the time where I heard this. Listen to it. Pretty simple. I counted dollars while God counted crosses. I counted gains where God counted my losses. I counted my worth and things gained and stored. But God sized me up for the scars that I bore. I counted my honors and I sought degrees. But He counted the hours that I had spent on my knees. And I never knew till one day by the grave how vain are the things in life that I